Good afternoon. Sorry about the technical glitch. There seems to have been a bit of a error.
Yeah, I could hear you and see Ken before, but you couldn't see or hear me.
Well, I think the problem was Jo was on here, but she couldn't get in, and then her.
Yeah.
Yes, I've just been eating pancakes, so yeah. Excuse the last.
Is it pancake day today?
Yes.
Is it pancake? Is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So sorry, everybody. No? Really, apologies for the late beginning.
Honestly, Pancake Day is forgiven because you're showing a religious affinity, so we clearly can't comment.
Yeah. Yes.
We've been on our unconscious bias training.
Oh, good, very well done.
So, is Jo out of action then, Emma?
Unfortunately, her computer has sort of had some sort of a crazy meltdown and is now asking her to do hundreds of updates. So she probably will be joining at some point.
Oh, but don't worry.
I was able to log on just quicker than her. Okay. So yes, apologies.
But don't worry, I was in early, and then it all started to go wrong. But Andrew, apparently, you could see and hear us, Andrew. But...
I could, yeah. I was spying.
I could see you, Ken, and I could see Jo, and then suddenly the whole lot went.
That's right. So she suggested we leave, and then I had trouble getting back in. So, well, we're a little late. How are we then? Let's have a look. We've got Carol. I know we have apologies from Sam, so I think we're ready to go then, Emma.
Yep.
So shall we start off then? So, well, may I welcome all members to the meeting of the Employment and Appeals this evening, and especially to Councillor Rosemary Powell, as this is her first meeting on this committee. So, and may I also extend a very warm welcome then to Emma and perhaps Jo later. And so you're going to be our clerk this evening then, and equally so a warm welcome, of course, to Carol Snell, who is our strategic director for resources. So now this little bit has been spoiled now, because what I was going to say is before I start the meeting, I would just mention one point to reassure members. And I was saying, I've checked with Jo, who assures me that she is not related in any way to Jackie Weaver of Handforth Parish Council fame. And I don't know if you followed that, but just to be sure, I'm going to be on my best behavior as chair this evening. And I think I was going to say this applies equally to you, Karen, as vice chair. And like in Handforth, we both want to avoid being put in the waiting room. And if none of you are familiar with this reference, I'm going to strongly urge you to go on to YouTube. Has everyone not seen that? You've surely seen it. You've all seen it.
Yeah.
I mean,
it just reminded me of a local council I used to be a member of.
Right. Well, it was quite something. I think they had 5 million plus hits and national media cover, and you can even buy T-shirts. But so there we are. So
it reminded me of a meeting I was on last week.
All right, I won't. We won't go there. We won't go there.
Chairman, before we start properly, who's actually on this committee?
Well, there is yes, you've got a point. It's Karen, Sam with apologies. Oh, no Miranda. Nick Woodley is here. And obviously Rosemary. Yes.
I was going to ask Andrew actually.
Oh, am I not meant to be here?
I thought you might be substituting, but obviously not. No. You're not substituting for Miranda.
Oh, no,
I'm here.
Oh, of course you are. Sorry. Of course you are.
I'm not supposed to be here.
No, you are.
I think. Let me put it another way. If Sam was here, there would be 8 councillors, and there are only meant to be 7 on any.
Yes. No, I think. Andrew, you can either stay as a councillor and observe, or you can have a night off.
Right. Well, that you've just made my mind up.
You're going to stay as a councillor for the excitement, yes.
Oh, absolutely. Right. Have a nice time.
Okay. Well done. You got there before me, Gail. I was really thinking I missed that one. So, and well, of course, we had a little bit of fun beforehand. Well, look, let's go to apologies then. So we have apologies from Sam Harvey. Agenda item 2 is declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations on tonight's agenda, please? I think not. Hopefully straightforward. Okay, agenda item 3, minutes of the last meeting. We need to confirm the minutes of Employment and Appeals Committee on the 29th of September 20th, a little while ago, and perhaps a brief recap, really. We had 2 policies which were looked at. One was the HR policies, and they were updated. And then we had a presentation on our apprenticeship strategy, which again is an agenda item tonight, because we did have full discussion on that particular point, and we raised several things, and we asked for it to come back for further discussion, clarification to this meeting. So that's where we are on that one. And on that particular topic at the last meeting, we did have a presentation from Sophie Hayes, who was our business administration apprentice, because that was particularly apt. And she spoke of her experiences, if you like, to date. Therefore, I think I would propose acceptance of the minutes from the chair, and I would seek a seconder. Gail, thank you for seconding, and obviously we'll note the exception of yourself, Rosemary, as a full acceptance. You were not in that meeting. So I think, therefore, I'll short track this on agenda item 4 with petitions, agenda item 5 with questions, and agenda item 6 of notices of motion. I've been notified of none. So therefore, we go straight to the apprenticeship strategy, agenda item 7. The report is 11/2021. It's pages 3 to 10 on your pack for this evening. And I think, Carol, I think we'll just go straight to you to perhaps do a little bit of a fast track catch up, which might be useful for Rosemary, and the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Good evening, everybody. Good to see you again. Yes, we discussed the apprenticeship strategy in September. We agreed that we would target this meeting to bring the strategy forward. And we acknowledged that it was later than we had hoped and anticipated, but we all understood the reasons why our progress had been somewhat hampered during 2020. I think perhaps the pause gave us a bit of an opportunity to reflect on the challenges of the apprenticeship strategy, and also our ability to develop the programme during that year in any event. And clearly our experience was that we just weren't in a position to progress with as many apprentices as we'd hoped that we would have been able to do. And in fact, there were a couple that we'd appointed just before and just after lockdown, who found the process last year, working remotely, working at home, but all found it quite difficult. So I think we acknowledged that we needed a programme that involved much more nurturing and coaching in any event, and it was something we weren't necessarily able to fulfil in the way we'd like to during 2020. So we didn't progress any further apprentices during that period. So as with many things, I think, the experience last year taught us quite a lot about perspective and what is realistic and achievable in the context of Rutland. So hence the strategy that we've developed has really, I feel, presented a more pragmatic and achievable strategy, rather than perhaps something that mirrors strategies that other larger authorities can put in place and deliver. So we're hoping that it reflects more about the Rutland context, and something that I think that we could hold up to. I think 2021 is going to be quite interesting from a job market perspective, and therefore where apprenticeship programmes and similar type of programmes come into play, particularly as we move into recovery, which again, we don't know when that might be. We just hope that it is some point in the not too distant future. So I think yeah, I think the job market will be quite interesting. I think individuals' aspirations, perhaps in terms of their current role, might feel that the last year's experience of COVID and lockdown may have an impact on people's aspirations, both people that are within the workforce, but I think also, and importantly, the aspirations and expectations of people that are coming through school, university, and colleges. So I think people coming into the workforce could look quite different, or they may just have different hopes and aspirations. Equally, there will be a number of people that come into the job market because they have lost their job. You know, reality is that people have been made redundant, and I think there's a fear that some industries just will struggle to recover, and that may again have an impact. So, you know, we know for us it's a tough budget year. We know that we're going to have pressures on that. It will be interesting to see what impact that has on our turnover, and again whether individuals make other choices. But I think for us that does reinforce, you know, in a complex year potentially for us as a workforce coming out of recovery and coming out of a period of time where most staff have been working from home, at a time when the external job market can start to look quite different. I think it is, hopefully, you know, my aspiration for 21 is that it does become a big push year for us in terms of not just apprenticeships, but development generally for our workforce, having come through a really difficult time. You know, I really hope that we can encourage and support our existing staff to be aspiring and really want to upskill and push forward. And it, you know, obviously apprenticeship programs is a really good method and process for staff to do that. So I really hope within our existing workforce we see an uplift this year in people coming forward to say, actually, I do want to progress. I do now feel quite inspired and aspired to do something else. I think would be good for us. And equally, you know, opportunities to bring new apprentices into the organisation from, you know, a school, university, college, or a previous job experience that may not quite have worked out, I think would be really good for us. And I'd really like to see more of that, perhaps in trainee type of roles. You know, I think we can really see how that should and could become a very integral part of our workforce model and succession planning going forward. So I hope what we've tried to explain within the strategy and what our aspiration is, that we focus on what we can do and what we can do really well, as opposed to chasing after hefty targets that perhaps become quite difficult to achieve. So I'm, you know, more hopeful that we can deliver a few good apprentices that go on to do really good things with us in particular, or if they make other choices, they may go as well. But hopefully they would see their career developing with Rutland and certainly the public sector. I think there was a recommendation last time, I think from Councillor Jones, in terms of the reference to care leavers, which we've incorporated into the strategy. And we will talk to our care leavers team in terms of how we take that forward over the next couple of months. I know Mark, our Chief Exec, was very keen to support that, as is the Director. So I'm sure we can progress that really well. So I hope that just gives a bit of the context and perhaps what might be ahead. I'm happy to take any other questions.
Yes, I think also then, I think, Carol, as a rider to that, what I perceive as being very interesting in the council is that, if you like, there's an awareness of what we're trying to do in the Rutland businesses at large. And as you know, you and I were talking just the other day about the interest from the Trevor Ellis transport setup, and it's quite interesting that he has a number of opportunities. Some, as you and I discussed, Carol, that are not quite within our remit, out of our unit, if you like, down at the Enterprise Park. But we do have opportunities. And of course, we can farm some of the others over to Brooksby and into Peterborough. But I mean, the idea of that, I think, is really good for Rutland as a whole, because it is very much something very close to my heart, how we bring on our young people, some of them who have missed out in some ways on our education, but this particular initiative and certainly the apprenticeships really brings them back into the fore, and we have examples of people who have achieved great things, you know, with that extra guidance. So that's first class. Are there any comments or questions? I'll take Miranda, and then I'll take Gail.
Thank you, Chair. The strategy is going to be underpinned by the action plan. Where are we with the action plan? Is there an opportunity to view that? Has it been created, or where are we with the action plan?
Yeah, we'll develop an action plan on the basis, if the strategy is approved, then we will develop a more specific action plan. And that will be a document that we can review and report through to our senior management team. And equally, we can bring back to this meeting in terms of highlighting what we've done, what we're hoping to do, and what our progress is.
And I suppose that this year that will take into account the sort of challenges of the working from home scenarios, which is going to be a bit difficult to overcome.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, I think the reality is, you know, the HR team, as with most of our teams across the council, we are still very immersed in delivering COVID response work, and that doesn't seem to be letting up at the minute. I think, you know, we're all aware that we get government announcements week on week, sometimes day on day, that seems to create another piece of work for local authorities to do. One of our current pieces of work, obviously, is setting up the lateral flow device testing provision out at Oakham Enterprise Park. So from my point of view, that has taken up, you know, quite a lot of my time over the last week or so in terms of, you know, engaging with some casual support to help us do that. So yes, as you say, everything is taken in the context of still ongoing COVID response work. Just as when we seem to feel that we're able to pick up areas of work again, something else comes along and we sort of tend to backpedal, which is really frustrating, but it is just a reality.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just interject also and say welcome to Joe. We have these trials and tribulations. They're sent to test us all, but well done. You're
back in. Apologies for this
all.
Evening.
It's all about experience and the learning curve. So, okay, if you have anything else to come back in within a moment, Miranda, then please do, and that applies to anyone. But let me go to Gail.
Thank you. The first thing I want to say is a purely practical one. As you all know, I do everything on paper because of my disability. And unfortunately, with a black and white printer, your bar charts, Carol, have all come out beautiful grey. So could you think about having patterned bar charts rather than coloured ones in future? Because I would have actually quite liked to have studied them. That's a practical, and I'm not meaning it as a moan. It's just a general, you know, it all applied to everything when I'm printing at home. It's fine if people print for me in the council offices because there are colour printers there, but there isn't one in my house. So that's that bit. That's the purely practical. Now, what I want to say, I want us to assume there is no COVID. Right, fully understand that everything is being upset at the moment in terms of timescales, ways of working, etc., because of COVID. So I want to talk about this in terms of the first year or two of its operation when it can be properly operated, put it that way. First of all, I took from what was said that one of the problems we had was people working from home, and sorry, what was written and what you said, Carol, and that what we took from it was that we needed to provide better nurturing and mentoring, which is totally understandable and is actually good practice for new people coming into an organisation anyway, as we all know. My first question is, was there anything else that we could learn from it in terms of supporting people specifically who are working from home? And the reason I ask that is I know we've all talked, and by we, I mean the whole country, has talked about a shift in working patterns from office-based to home-based. And whilst more recently, I've heard a lot of radio and television broadcasts where they're saying that firms as well as individuals can't wait to be back in their offices now. They feel too isolated. I think going forward, we, like everybody else, will have more home-based working, or at least some of the time of our staff will be at home. We won't have everybody in the office 5 days a week. And so I think we need to think about our apprentices in a mixed economy of some office, some home. And is there anything we've learned that can help us develop that? Or is that still part of the thinking that will inevitably go on with departments and managers going forward? So that's my first question, specific. Shall I just carry on until I finish, Ken?
Well, Well, ask Carol, how would you like to, do you want to answer that one immediately, or are they related?
No, they're not related.
So let's do them one by one then, Carol. Would you
Okay.
like to just come in on that?
Yeah. So what have we learned? I think in terms of what we've learned generally over the last year about working from home, it is quite vast. And I think we have everybody on the spectrum of how they cope with working from home and whether they would prefer to be in the office. Bearing in mind, we were forced into this situation, so we had no time to prepare or to put into place any particular strategies or ways of working in the way that an organisation would normally do if they were going through a change programme and move into an agile working model. So I would say for us, we've done remarkably well to do a bit of learning as we go along, but then as we did go along, we were being more proactive in things that we were putting in place. So, particularly around health and well-being as an example, because people were learning how to cope with working from home, but also their whole life being disrupted. So again, that's the extra layer, is that this wasn't just an agile working strategy and model, because we had the enormous challenges of people's lives being locked down. So, juggling and jumbling those and trying to support people as best we can has been a big priority for us over the past year. And we continue to do things, and we have a very strong wellbeing programme and a range of activities. And, it's fair to say, and, you will be in this category, I'm sure, as in the same way that I am, we all have our wobbles and we all have our ups and downs when we seem to be coping with things, and then we're not coping with things, then we are, then we're not. And sometimes there's very little that changes, but for some reason, how we cope and deal with things change quite dramatically. And it's very personal to us, it's very individual to us. I think in terms of our apprentices and perhaps why those weren't as successful, would they have been successful if we'd been in a normal working environment? I can't say whether we made wrong appointments. I would say it's a combination of things. Were we prepared to work in the way that we were? No, we weren't. Were those individuals prepared or expecting to be in the office 1 minute and then sent home the next? No, they weren't. A couple of examples they gave, one in particular where he was struggling with, it was, a young man from school, so it's his first job. And, we can all remember, can't we, our first jobs, and the importance of working in that team, moving from, an educational learning environment into a working setting is extremely different. The relationships are different, the demands on you are different, the processes you go through is all very different. And I remember talking to one of them just after he started, and I said to him, "How are you getting on?" And he said, "Oh, I'm so tired." He'd only been there a few days, but he was already exhausted. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, you've done 2 days of full-time work and you're exhausted. So I think, what we have to learn is that transition, I suppose, is what I'm trying to come around to, is that transition between, particularly for school leaver, college leaver, university leaver, that transition into work. If we are working in an agile or distance way, we've got to find other ways of bridging that and that relationship and that engagement, because I think being part of the team, the level of supervision and support you need is quite high. And I think what we recognise is when we was in the office, we could do that quite readily because you see people, you're visible all the time, you can watch out, you can see signs, you can have ad hoc meetings and discussions. that doesn't happen in quite the same way when you're at home. So I think, you know, whatever the future model is, whether we're all back in the building, whether we're all at home, or whether we've got something in the middle, there will be things we need to unravel, because they will become our new way of working, and yes, the restrictions from COVID would hopefully start to ease away.
I think what Gail has raised here is obviously once we've approved this, hopefully, and we will have this action plan, as we've said, but I think it's also in the wider field of employment. I'm sure once we are back to normal, it will be a very interesting paper to bring to this particular committee as to, you know, how we coped, the pluses and obviously minuses. I mean, there are, by certain, you know, anyone's imagination, there are lots of pluses, but there are also difficulties. And I think as to the tiredness, I do think you set me back now. I think with some of the young people we had over in Corby, I think there's an under the surface tension with young people starting in work. You don't realize it all looks calm. It's rather like the swan on the lake. You know, they look rather calm, but underneath it's all happening. And I think that brings the tiredness. But before I go to Rosemary, Gail, does that bring you into a sort of a secondary, well, no, you've got another question, well, but is there another secondary on that particular topic?
No, I would just like to make the observation that school days in terms of young people's actually working is sort of 9:15 till 4 o'clock with a big lunch break and two distinct breaks, morning and afternoon, quite often. So I think, you know, a 9 to 5 is quite a big shock of itself, whatever you're doing. But no, my others are unrelated, Chairman.
Okay, so do you want to move on to your other questions then, and then we'll go to Rosemary?
Okay. In the section headed Our Commitment, the second paragraph, I would quite like something about being supportive of our care leavers there. I know it is in the document later on, but I quite like it up front because I think that sends a message, please, if assuming others are agreeable, of course.
I don't think that would be amiss, Carol, would it? I think it just really just tidies it a little, if tidy is the right word, to be honest with you.
Yes, that's fine. I can include that.
Thank you. And
is that, can I just go, is that related to that, Nick, or is it?
Oh, okay.
Let's just have an interjection then. Okay.
Sorry, I just want to clarify that wouldn't mean that we have to bring this back again and delay approval.
No. The way we,
that's fine.
No, we operate on a fairly fluid within this committee, common sense. That's not a critical statement, but that's the way we do it. And yes, it will come back, obviously, but it will come back in a meaningful way in washing up all the comments, really. So, okay, back to you, Gail.
Thank you. That's why I said, Nick, I hope everyone's in agreement, because if they are, that's it. And which we trust Carol to get the words right. In paragraph 4.1.4, there is a table about new starters. And my question is that new starters who are appointed full-time permanent, or does it include any interim agency or short contract staff?
Are you talking about the apprenticeship strategy paper or the gender pay gap paper?
I think she's.
Oh, I'm on the gender pay gap. I do apologise. Got ahead of myself. I apologise. Sorry, scrub all that.
Sorry, I was thinking you were on what Carol has just related. Sorry, so I didn't stop you. Apologies.
I do apologise, everybody.
Well, it's my fault.
I finished on the apprenticeship then. And I've just got that one question on.
Right. So we're going on to the next page. So, okay, well, that's fine. So I'll therefore go to Rosemary. If you're off.
Thanks, Chairman. Just a question, which apologies if because I wasn't part of previous discussions, I may have missed. Just looking at the strategy, obviously there is some figures mentioned and targets of apprenticeship program starts, which is good to have targets. I'm just wondering, in terms of any learning from people who don't complete apprenticeships, and this is a bit related to Gail's question about you know, current ways of working, but in terms of that quality and making sure the quality follows through from both sides and not just the starts.
And I wonder whether what we can do with that, Councillor Powell, I mean, I can have a look through there to see how we can reflect it within the document, but perhaps again, it's a good action point for the action plan in terms of doing that reflection and feedback, both in terms of understanding the impact of those that do complete and that are studying, but as you say, learning from any issues that arise from those that don't complete.
It may be something on the underlying action plan to make sure that's followed through, to make sure that any lessons learned can be fed back into the system.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Thank you.
Good. So, any other questions on this thing? As I said last time, we actually worked through it particularly well, but we did just have these various points to bring up this evening. So I think if we're all content with that as we are, and there's no other questions, then the decision recommendation is that the committee approves the council's apprenticeship strategy as to Appendix A, and I'm happy to propose that from the chair, with the caveat, obviously, that we're asking Carol to develop this. And what we normally do to any new members, we don't put a time constraint on that. What we say to Carol is we would like to see it before this committee when you believe you have some meaningful a meaningful paper to present, and sometimes that needs to go forward a month or two longer than what might be deemed normal, but it's the way we get a quality paper. So can I take it, Nick, that you were seconding that from the chair? So it's proposed by myself, Joe, and seconded by Councillor Woodley. So that's been approved, and unless there's anyone howling their discontent, I'll take that as unanimous then, and therefore we move on. Okay, so therefore the next item is agenda item 8. It's the gender pay gap, and again this is to receive the report 12/2021. It's pages 11 to 18 within our pack, and I think again, this is something that members of this committee who've been on a long time, we revisit this on a very regular basis. It's quite interesting from the council point of view because of the nature, well, I'm probably stealing your thunder, Carol, for the new members, but because of the makeup of our particular workforce, it is more I could be careful I don't say the wrong words, but more female dominated, as it were, by nature of the jobs. And therefore that sometimes would appear to give the wrong skew on figures, but it is where it is. So Carol, would you like to take up from there?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, this is our annual gender pay gap report. So just a reminder, this is data as at 31st of March 2020. So it is historical in that respect, and this level of reporting will always be historical because the requirement is to publish your previous year's data by the following year. So for example, this data will be published by the end of March 21, and then our 21 data isn't due to be published until 22. Yes, this is the fourth time we've been here now. It's our fourth reporting period. So paragraph 3.1 and paragraph 3.3 show the movement over the 4 reporting periods. And as we have said before in each of the reports, we expect the percentages to fluctuate somewhat year on year. And in the first year, we delved into why is that, because clearly it wasn't until we got our second year data that we saw that deviation, and our question was, well, why has it deviated in that way? and other authorities and organisations were doing exactly the same thing. So it was useful that we had some comparator people to speak to. So as before and as expected, there's a further fluctuation and change in our data for 2020 compared to 2019. I think, again, just to reinforce what we said, we are a small organisation with a small workforce. So just that small shake does tend to create quite a bit of difference once you start looking at percentages of even smaller data. I say we do have a small workforce. There's relatively small changes, but it does make a sizable percentage shift. Now, of interest, one of the areas we've looked at and what we've talked about before that causes that shift is our level of movement through the year, particularly with employees leaving that may have been at the top of the scale, new people coming in that are appointed at the lower end of the scale, and of course you may get a gender change in that as well. So although overall our gender profile doesn't change a great deal, we're usually around 75% female, 25% male, when you look at individual jobs, that could shift and balance around, which is exactly what happens. For me, I'm actually quite interested to see how March 21 figures come out.
Yes, I know what you're going to say.
The reason is our turnover has been quite different in 2020. So I am quite interested to see whether the turnover and the movements over the last year has any particular impact this year, because the turnover is that much lower quarter by quarter. We are quite different. So, it'll be interesting to see. But certainly, the charts in 4.1.1D, which I apologise, Gail, that this is a coloured chart. So right. I will make a note on this one as well to do you some different patterns in there. And I appreciate, looking at it cold, you might, look, well, it's just a number of figures and numbers in there. But because I've looked at these figures year on year, you can see just about within there where the male and female balance within a particular pay quartile starts to shift around a little bit. And that is enough to make the difference for this year, particularly if you look between 2019 and 2020. So for me, that picture, just reinforces the shift of balance about where people are to cause that change in median and mean figures. And I think the only bit that I would just reinforce, as I have done, every year, recruitment and appointments within Rutland are not completely devolved out into line managers. Line managers do their recruitment. HR advertise the jobs for them. We help arrange their shortlisting and their interviews. They make the offers, but we do the contracts of employment. So the HR team would see immediately if managers were trying to act outside of policy and appoint men and women on different elements of a pay scale. So our pay policy for one, which is coming to full council again in a couple of weeks' time, reinforces that new employees should come in on the bottom of the scale. But equally, the fact that HR check and sign off and send out all contracts means that if there was any deviation in practice and different practice to men and women, we would spot it and prevent it from happening pretty quickly.
Yes.
The only final thing to say in terms of comparative data, I always like to see what other people are doing. But again, because of the timescales, it's very, very limited. A lot of authorities still haven't sorted out their March 20 data yet, so I've not been able to give many comparative figures. The government did give some leeway on the publishing for the previous year's data, but they're not for this year, so we do have to publish by March 21. So that there's very little comparative data. But again, as we said before, local authorities have different models of workforce in terms of the type of roles they still have in-house. For example, care homes, waste collection services and leisure all have quite a significant impact. So the comparative data is quite difficult for us to really analyse in any detail. But I hope it's all very statistical little challenges within this data.
If you enjoy looking at the figures, I mean, they really are quite interesting, both historically and going forward. You can always predict. We have one example coming up, for example, with our chief exec, where if you take, if you like, the highest paid individual within the organization, female, and then going forward to male, that would be very interesting to see how that affects the figures. And showing my length of service as a councillor, I can go back, as you will remember, Carol, where the whole of our top management team was female. And I'm talking the chief exec and Carol Chambers, and on our accounts and all the rest of it. Whereas now, it's at the top end. I think it's veering the other way. So we have to, and as you say, it's the long figures that, the long time figures that actually I find interesting as to how they work. So enough of me. I've got Gail and I've got Nick. I take you first, Gail. Ladies first.
Thank you. Apologies, Carol. It is the question I tried to ask before, and that is in.
We're taking that as read, Gail. Sorry.
Yeah, 4.1.4. The new starters. What's it including?
Okay, so that is actual employees onto our payroll. So that wouldn't include agency workers, for example, but it would include all other new employees onto the payroll.
And so when we have interims, which we do have at the moment quite a lot in places, are they on our payroll or are they agency workers?
If they're an interim worker, then they're not on our payroll. They're employed by an employment agency, and then we pay the agency fee for them. So they wouldn't be included in these figures.
No, that's fine, thank you. And I understand it, but I do wonder how much our interims and agencies might skew these figures if they were included.
Yeah, quite possibly. I mean, for the reporting, the government guidelines on reporting is very clear, and they are excluded because it's and I can see you could arguably look at an organisation that has a very high proportion of agency or interim workers on quite varied rates, as we know, because that's what the market does. So you could argue that for them the profile is not necessarily that representative, and I suppose it depends on your level of agency and interims that you have at the time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Gail. Nick.
Couple. Carol, first is oddly enough on that same graphic, the new starters. If you could just correct the typo for 2019 to 29 we have on there rather than 2019 to 2020 in the green, which is the right hand bar for Gail.
Which paragraph are you looking at?
The new starters graphic, percentage ages, page 15, top of the page. You've got a blue on the left, a red in the middle, and a green on the right for the male, female, male, female. Yeah, it's just the key has a typo in it.
Oh, sorry, I'm not finding it. Which paragraph number again?
It's the top of page 15, the graphic.
My page numbers are different to yours.
Okay.
Well, it's under the
new
starters percentage in the brackets ages.
Yeah, I've got it. Okay.
Yeah, just a minor temp. Yeah, obviously not a biggie, but just to be correct. And 4.1.5 underneath, which is the levers, the percentages male versus female. I find that chart a little sort of doesn't really make a lot of give me any information realistically, because I would be interested in the levers by sex within a percentage of the employed staff, not as a comparison between male and female. So I would be interested, is there a higher tendency for females to move on in the organization versus males? Is that
that's an interesting way to look at it, Nick, isn't it? Yes,
it's my statistics background, Councillor.
That's actually very helpful because
that's good.
when I did this particular table, I think I did it in about 5 different ways.
Yes.
And then I confused myself as to what was more meaningful. So I'm thinking I probably took out the chart that you're just referring.
Maybe.
To, yeah.
It just to me would give us an idea about retention, and do we have something to address that are
Yes.
on in relation to this particular subject of gender employment, whether if we have a higher turnover of females versus males. That's all for me.
Would there be a concern, for example, in one particular area for one particular reason? It may be a very high demanding role which people get, frustrated on or difficult. No, it's a good point, and you probably covered it, Carol.
Yeah. I think the slight dilemma, and which is probably perhaps why I took it. I'm just trying to think why I took it out again. Is because we are 75% female anyway. It's a matter of where you draw the percentage from to try and give the position that you're referring to, which is a woman more likely to leave than a man, or vice versa.
Yeah, which is what I think the point of the table is. To me, that's what I think the table's trying to portray. But I mean, it's to me, as represented, I just find it meaningless because it has no bearing on are we likely to have more females leave in comparison to other females. I don't think a female's likely to leave just because a male colleague has left. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's all. And it was only an observation. I just would find that a more useful piece of data. But other than that, I think the report is excellent.
No, it is good, but I think it's a fair point, Nick, because it would show up in a particular business if there was a particular problem which is gender related because of the particular pressures within that role. That might be interesting. Well, it would be very necessary because then you would want to try and do something about it. So that's probably sparked something for you to think about a little further than Carol. I think that's the benefit of this committee.
Yeah, and what we've done every couple of years is taken a deep dive into some of our professional groups as well. So I think, again, it's useful to do it on a very targeted basis, because otherwise, you just go round in circles doing statistics and trying to find something that might not be there. So, but that, I think, in terms of turnover by gender in some of our bigger professional areas would be of value to do,
I'm going to give Nick 10 out of 10 for looking in fine detail at this meeting. I'll go to Rosemary, Gail, and then I'll come to you if I may. So, Rosemary.
Thank you. Can I just ask a bit of a random question? It's just for my interest. In terms of the definition of whether people are male or female, is that based on HR records when they start? Is that based on people completing an annual survey, or just interested to know where that definition actually comes from?
Yeah, it's based on what the employee has told us. So generally that is when they join. So if there was to be a change and that was within the permissible legal realms of what an employee could do, and they notify us, then their record would be amended accordingly. So everybody in their record is defined as female or male, and we have created another category for those that perhaps do not want to declare, or there is some other reason in terms of what they declare, but we don't have any at this point in time.
Okay, all right, no, thank you, just interested to know. Thank you.
So no other questions there, Rosemary. Okay, so I'll go to Gail.
Thank you. It's relating back to our previous discussion, really, about people leaving. We do still have exit interviews, and I would be quite interested at some point in the future when we're talking about this topic of the gender pay gap, whether anything's come out of the exit interviews that indicates gender is a factor in people leaving. That's all. Thank you.
Yes, that's doable as well. We could draw that out. I mean, from experience in looking at the exit interviews or the forms with if an individual fills it in if they don't do the interview, I've not experienced that as a reason for leaving. Yeah,
that's good, but it's always possible that the chaps leave because they're working in an all-female environment in their department and they don't like it.
That's an interesting question. Takes me back actually on the exit interviews. What is our policy now, Carol? Who conducts the exit interview? I say that because do you remember many years ago the chairman of the council used to be asked, or other senior members of the council used to actually be invited in on that. And that's amiss of me. I should know how do we normally conduct an exit interview?
So when an employee resigns and we confirm their resignation to them, we talk to them at that point about an exit interview. So they can either have an exit interview with a member of the HR team, or they can fill in the pro forma. Some people don't want to have a discussion, but we still want their comments. So a few years ago, we did invite everybody to an exit interview, and then people just didn't turn up, to be honest. So we now give them the option: would you like to have an interview with an HR person? They are confidential. The only comment that we make to them in terms of confidentiality is if they were to disclose anything around bullying, harassment, for example, then we would have to do something more formal about that if they were to declare that had been an issue. So generally people fill in the questionnaire and then we do the analysis.
On that other point, I am very much aware of that, so that's good. Is that a legacy hand, Gail, or is that no? That's fine. Okay. Are there any other questions on this particular point then, members? No? Okay, so I think, well, thank you, Cara, for taking us through that. And obviously you've got some varied notes to actually work on for the way forward. And I think, you know, with your expertise, we know that you will incorporate those when we next visit, you know, this particular paper. So the decision recommendation is that the committee notes the council's gender pay gap data for the 31st of March 2020, and the commentary comparison to the previous reporting period. So as this is for noting, and we've discussed it fully, we will duly record then in the minutes that this has been noted. So therefore we move on to agenda item 9, which is any urgent business, of which there is none. And I suppose we don't include it on the agenda, but we don't, for newer members, we don't actually fix a firm date of a future meeting on this. The chairman normally would liaise with Carol on this, and that is because there are certain items that come to us by statute. There are certain items that come to us on an annual basis, rather like the one that we've just looked at with the March 2020 deadline, etc. But I think I would say to members, look, if you have a matter that you feel is something that we should visit within this committee, then we should jolly well do so. And I think we've already mentioned one, and I'm not sure when you were saying, right, the line is drawn and we can now look back on the historical demands on the workforce, but obviously it's COVID. And I'm sure at some time in the future, we're going to have a very interesting paper as to what is our analysis with the stresses on staff, the plus points. If it were to happen again, how do we capture the experience and what would we do differently? I mean, it really is, and this is just not for Rutland County Council. I think it's for the whole world, this one, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of other data published along the ways, but interesting things. But so if you do have any items to consider, that they can go straight through to Carol, and Carol would obviously circulate the panel that we've had this, and we'll try and incorporate that. So so that's particular one. So I think really it just remains for me to say I'm going to thank everyone for your attendance this evening, and well done, Joe. We've recovered quite well. I have noticed Councillor Hemsley has been listening in. Apologies, I should have noted that you were on screen, or at least I hope you are. Otherwise, I'm talking to a name with an X alongside it, but I hope you enjoyed listening into the meeting. Therefore, we will reset the meeting going forward. It's good you missed my opening, Joe, I think, because I was going back saying, we don't want the clerk to put any of us in the waiting room from our our Mrs. Weaver, who was rather tough at the Hanford Parish Council. So we've avoided any of us being put into the waiting room. So we've all been well behaved. And I'm also, in chairing this meeting, I'm also in Gail's good books, because I promised her I would try to end before 8:15, because there's a very important Luton Town football match coming up. So there you are, 10 out of 10. So thank you, Carol, and thank you, Joe, and thank you, everyone. And we'll have a further meeting a little bit along the way. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Stay safe.
Good night.
Bye.
Thank you then. Bye.